You say his original, some scholars also say that he comes from the Hanafi tradition, or he kind of systematized the Abu Hanifa's theology. Do you agree with that? Was he following the Hanafi tradition, or was he, um, I guess, developing something new?
Yeah, so I think this is a very important question. Um, I think that there's different things going on that we need to unpack. He certainly is a Hanafi scholar, and some of the core ideas, views, and approaches of Abu Hanifa and Abu Hanifa's students and descendants in the tradition do play an important role in his thinking. But um, I do think there is a step change between Abu Hanifa's thinking and the thinking between Abu Hanifa and Maturidi is doing something new on the level of theology in terms of bringing in different rational ideas from the philosophical traditions. He's got ideas from the Mu'tazili traditions. He's got the Hanafi ideas and various other sources that are in his time, and he brings them together to do something. At this formative period of the Kalam tradition, he brings it together and makes something genuinely new in terms of a rational system. But what he's trying to do, of course, as all sort of Sunni theologians are trying to do, is to uh, defend core positions within Scripture, within the Quran, core elements of the tradition that's been handed on as well. So, in those senses, he's certainly drawing and standing within the Hanafi tradition. But I think it's an exaggeration that some scholars later on they wanted to seek an authority for Maturidi that went earlier into the Salaf, into the first few generations. And Abu Hanifa is a better source of authority for that kind of claim. So then they said, well, Maturidism is just Hanafism, and all that Maturidi is doing is just, he's just basically taking the beliefs of Abu Hanifa and just, defending them with new techniques. I think that that's only partially true for the reasons I've outlined. It's more than that. There is a different there is a traditionalist Hanafism, which has very little kalam and is just a core akida, something like the akida of Tahawi. This is also coming from Abu Hanifa's legacy, but it's a very different approach than Maturidism. So I think that it's important to distinguish these elements and not always take later scholars' views for granted about historical matters, but to investigate ourselves. And from my own investigations, it's very clear to me that, and other scholars have come to similar conclusions, that he is an important original thinker in this rational tradition and discipline.
Comparison between Maturidi and Tahawi.
Oh, Tahawi, yeah. So Tahawi is interesting. Tahawi, basically, the answer to that is that it seems that Abu Hanifa, he used to teach kalam, right? Very early. Like I've got an article coming out that's showing that I don't think the Fiqh al-Akbar, which is commonly taught as Maturidi's, not the one said to be transmitted by Hamad. I don't think this is Maturidi's. Abu Hanifa's own text. Yeah, it's not Abu Hanifa's own text. It's a later text. But the one that's written, the one by Abu Muti al-Balkhi, who's a student of Abu Hanifa, is genuine, I think. But what I'm saying here is that Maturidi, he used to teach kalam in the early days, and then for various reasons or his own choice, Abu Hanifa himself stopped teaching kalam, right, to his students. He just taught fiqh. And so people who took from his kalam when he was teaching it, that's the kind of as we talked about, the roots of the Maturidi tradition coming out of that, along with other sources. The people who just took, when he did stop teaching kalam, they took this kind of what we could say a more traditionalist Hanafism. That's the sort of thing that Tahawi is taking on. So Tahawi, he becomes a Hanafi. He's a Shafi'i originally. He becomes a Hanafi, and he is a muhaddith as well as a faqih. And he has this. He doesn't have really any kalam works. But he just has fiqh works and hadith works and so on. And then he writes this creed, which is very much like the creeds of like the Hanbali scholars or the scholars of the Ahl Hadith of Ibn Hanbal and others. But there are some distinctive positions in there which show that he's still got this kind of Hanafi flavor to it. For example, he says God is not in any of the directions, so there's a kind of transcendence in that. He mentions something that indicates he thinks that something close to a takween type position. But he doesn't go into any sort of speculation, and so this is the Tahawi style of traditionalist Hanafism. This carried on for a few centuries, and you get people into the sort of 5th century still following that. But then Maturidism really starts to dominate everywhere, and what the Maturidis started to do is to write commentaries on Tahawi's creed. And when they wrote those commentaries, they then started to bring in Kalam concepts to explain Tahawi and bring Tahawi into Maturidism. And then later on, even after like we have Ibn Taymiyyah coming in Damascus, we have is it Ibn Abi Iz, who is a Hanafi who writes a kind of a commentary of Tahawi in the kind of Ibn Taymiyyah style, with that kind of tradition, sort of Taymiyyah traditionalism. So you get people, and then you get Asharis writing on Tahawi, and everyone's trying to claim Tahawi as like, because he's an early person, early member of Al-Sunnah, they're trying to claim him for themselves, depending on how they comment on him. But in his original position, I think he wasn't a Kalam figure at all. He was a traditionalist Hanafi, presenting what he took as the teachings of Abu Hanifa from his transmission line.
There's a, I guess, related question to that here, which says, like, could you please discuss the theology tradition in Samarkand before Maturidi and including Maturidi's teachers? So what was the tradition like in Samarkand?
Yeah, so we don't have a lot of information about that tradition. We know that one of the students of Abu Hanifa was Abu Muqatil al-Samarkandi, and he, the author of this Kitab al-Alim wa Muta'alim, which is often attributed to Abu Hanifa, but really what it is Samarkandi is writing down Abu Hanifa's responses to his questions. So he's the Muta'alim and Abu Hanifa's the Alim. But then we get a kind of gap, and it's not so clear what's going on. But at some point, there's this something called Dar al-Juzjaniya, is a madrasa that is set up in Samarkand, and I think it's Abu Nasr is Juzjaniya is his main Abu Hanifa's main teacher. And then what happens is that so he learns in this tradition. This is like the students of Ash-Shaybani. Seem to be the main line of tradition here. So it's so it's a few generations from Ash-Shaybani. People study with Muhammad ibn Hasan al-Shaybani in Baghdad, or more than Kufa really at that point. And then they come back to Samarkand and set up teaching circles and eventually this madrasa. And then the son of Abu Nasr Juzjaniya, I think it's Abu Ahmed. He basically, after his father dies, he becomes the, or I think his father maybe is kidnapped or captured or something. But he becomes the head of the madrasa. But then everyone goes into an uproar, and everyone says, well, look, Al-Maturidi is the most senior here. He might not be the son, but he's the top scholar. And so then he ends up getting installed as the main person there. And then some of the followers of the son, I think Abu Ahmed, they go and start a rival madrasa called the Iyadiyah, right? So you have these two strands, and in an article I've written about the students of after Maturidi passes, this Abul Hasan al-Rustukhfani, he becomes the new head of the madrasa, and he carries on teaching broadly according to al-Maturidi, but also bringing in ideas from al-Hakim al-Samarkandi, who's another figure associated with the other trends. So you kind of got this more rationalistic trend in the Darul Juzjaniya, and you've got this Darul or Iyadiyya, who are this slightly more traditionalist trend within Samarkand. And then what seems to have happened is that Rustukhfani actually is in a way reconciling a bit between the two, and he's kind of more, even though he's in one, he's kind of bringing in some of their ideas. And then by the end of the century, or into the next century, people forget about there ever being this distinction, and they start to just draw from it all and just talk about the position of our, ashabuna, or our people, our companions, as well as sometimes saying al-Maturidi is the Ra'is, he's the head. So by the end of the kind of 5th century, by the time of Abu Yusr al-Bazdawi, who's like Qadi in Samarkand and so on, and writes this important book called Usuluddin, he's just saying, our scholars say this, and al-Maturidi is the head of, is like the most important, basically, and they start to treat him as the most important figure. And over time, even centuries later, they start eventually to be known as Maturidis. But for most of the time, they just call themselves Hanafis, or Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah and so on. So this is some of the sort of background in some. It's an interesting time and an interesting period of scholarship, and it wasn't widely known for a while. It was kind of just localized, and then it spread to like Bukhara about the time of Bazdawi, and then it started to kind of really in the centuries after spread throughout the Muslim world.